Hello, this is Kyle, also known as Alientude, and today what I have for you is a review of the LK Chen Heavenly Horse Dao. Now, I have two of them here, and if you look, they are slightly different. This one has more recurve to the blade than this one. I believe this is an older model of the Heavenly Horse Dao, and this is what you can expect to get if you were to buy one now. Now, I said earlier that I believe this is the older model and this is the newer model, but I think I'm going to have to correct that because this sword weighs 1 pound 9 ounces, which is exactly what LK Chen says on the website, whereas this one weighs 1 pound 5 ounces. And the hilt, or the cord wrap on this one is a kind of bright red. This is more of a maroon. And the pictures on LK Chen's website show this color too. So this actually might be the one that you would be getting if you ordered it new. This one still has some recurve to it, but this one is noticeably recurved. Now these are on loan to me from LK Chen directly, and they are well-used swords. Both of them have some issues with them because of how much they've been shipped around and used and potentially abused. So they are not in new condition. They're not even in remotely new condition. So keep that in mind during this video. If you wanted to buy one of these from LK Chen, they cost around $285 and then $70 shipping to me. So that would be $355. If you want to buy from Kult of Athena, they have them in stock as of the recording of this video at $388 without including shipping. So seems like LK Chen is probably the better bet there than buying from Kult of Athena, but you know, that doesn't account for all variables. And I will put links in the description for both LK Chen's listing and Kult of Athena's. So I'm going to switch interchangeably between these two swords during the course of this video. I will say this one I like more overall because that recurve is extra. It just gives this sword a really unique look that I really appreciate. However, this is also the one that I had to use less because in the middle of cutting with it, the guard just came completely loose. This could be epoxied back into place relatively easily. Now, I don't know a lot about the history and use of these swords, but what I can say is just from picking them up and moving them around a little bit, you can learn some stuff pretty quickly. These are not wrist-based swords. You don't do a lot of, wrist-based actions. You're going to be doing more shoulder cutting and draw cuts, that kind of thing with these swords. I assume since they are called the Heavenly Horse Dao, that they were intended primarily for horseback, for cavalry use. And to talk more about that, I want to introduce my friend who will give you a bit of a rundown on the sword.
Thanks for having me back on, Kyle. So we're talking about the large Han Dao, the Heavenly Horse Han period Dao. I don't have one right now. This is a later period Dao, but it's very interesting how it was created. The Heavenly Horse Dao, just like the earlier one that we saw, is a very complex design. Unlike this Tang Dynasty Dao that is of a wedge cross-section, the Heavenly Horse Dao has a very complicated cross-section with a fuller running down the middle and a secondary bevel and a very gentle curve along its spine, which allows for, when it's held, bringing the point to a position where it can be more easily brought in line for thrusting, which is useful if it's being used for cavalry. It's got great thickness at the back, but it has distal taper brought along the sides. All of these show that it came from earlier Bronze Age designs where they had to cheat a little bit to make it strong and have slightly more complex geometries, especially if they want to make very long swords. Again, it has very simple composition in the hilt. We hadn't got very complicated hilt designs just yet. Why did it kind of come about? We'll get into that in a second. Something else that's very interesting about it is it had a very long legacy, both locally and throughout the ages. These type of swords with the ring pommel at the back were seen throughout the region. It had mirrors in the cultures in neighboring Korea, in Japan, but also were seen as far away as parts of Central Asia and stretching out into Europe. And these types of back-edged, single-edged sword designs continued to be seen in some cases as late as into the 7th century. Even if they weren't exactly copies, they were perhaps influenced by earlier Chinese designs. The size also is something that persisted beyond the Han Dynasty, even though, as we mentioned previously, you can have ones that are either used in one or two hands. You end up with two-handed Dao that are seen beyond the Han into the northern and southern dynasties, into the Sui dynasties, and even into the Tang. So this is not a feature just of the Han period swords. So where did it come from? Well, we mentioned last time that the infantry Dao perhaps came about as a result of all of the militarization that was going on at the time, but the big enemy of the day was the Xiongnu. Sometimes they're referred to as the Huns, although that's an ambiguous term. But the nomadic tribes, that the Turkic peoples that existed mostly in Mongolia and the steppes to the north of modern-day China, were a constant threat and a constant pressure raiding along the northern borders of the Han Empire. And Emperor Wu was constantly struggling to deal with them. And again, we do have examples of some of their swords, and it seems that they used Dao or single-edged swords that resembled these designs. Could that have been a starting place for where these designs come from? Again, it's not clear who came up with the idea to weaponize Dao first, whether they started off as from the more smaller utility knives or whether they came from the Xiongnu. It's not exactly clear. What is clear is that Emperor Wu had a problem with dealing with the Xiongnu. He had a lack of horsepower issue. The Han Chinese had not a lot of horses, certainly not as many as the ponies of the Xiongnu. And what's more, the Xiongnu ponies were better, and he needed cavalry to be able to keep up with the quick maneuver and much more maneuverable nomadic peoples. To solve this problem, he tried to procure more horses, first by buying them, and later by launching a campaign all the way to Daiyuan, which was a territory that was originally Greco-Bactrian, an area near modern-day Uzbekistan. And they had much larger horses that were, in Chinese they're referred to as the heavenly horses. Originally he tried to purchase them, and when those ambassadors failed, he ended up launching a campaign called the War of Heavenly Horses. It's spectacular. It's definitely something that you should read up on because it's a fascinating part of history. Xiongnu tried to saw what was occurring and tried to get involved to stop it. Ultimately, they failed. The Emperor Wu, in the end, did receive the necessary horses. So the horses came back, and he's able to continue to pursue his continual war against the Xiongnu. During this time, the riders are not using stirrups, and so as a result, you cannot maneuver yourself as a cavalryman quite as well as if you think about a knight or a samurai or what have you, where you can do some of these more fancy maneuvers from horseback. So perhaps that contributes to why we see some of the features in these sabers. The forward curved design, the very long sort of blade, they all could potentially help a cavalryman who is not able to get down and lean out of the saddle in a way that you might be able to if you had the advantage of using if you had the advantage of being able to use stirrups. So I think that it's really nice that LK Chen made such a beautiful sword and that he named it after the heavenly horses that were so famous for the period in which these were used militarily. Okay, back to you, Kyle.
Thanks for that overview. So taking a look at the geometry of this sword, this is very similar to the Royal Arsenal Handao that I did a video on a few months ago, in that it has a relatively thick spine, a fuller that runs pretty much the entire blade, and then the edge bevel is very short. You know, this is about an edge bevel of about 20% of the blade. So it's a robust blade and a robust edge bevel, but it's not an edge bevel particularly conducive to slicing and cutting cleanly. Again, I think this sword was probably used mostly with shoulder-based cuts. I can't really do much here because this is a long sword. But when you're doing more of chops and heavy hacks and cuts from horseback, you don't need the really good geometry for slicing cleanly and cutting cleanly. This is more of a powerful weapon than it is a nimble dueling weapon or something that's designed for super clean cuts. So the blades on both of these are made from pattern welded Damascus or folded steel, and LK Chen has the composition, which I will put up right here. It is a beautiful pattern. I'm showing it on this one more because the pattern is much more brought out, probably with some kind of etching acid, than on the other one. It's a beautiful pattern. LK Chen has this on most of their swords, and it's a nice touch. This one is probably the most prominent I've seen on any of LK Chen's swords. It really does look nice. This is a mostly rectangular shape. It's actually more trapezoidal because the edge side is a little bit thinner than the spine side, and the cord wrap is very simple. It's effective at keeping edge alignment when using the correct technique, but there's the fact that there's no guard at all. This is just kind of like a ferrule or something like that. There is no guard at all, so you have to be really careful when moving this sword around not to let your hand slip up the blade and grab the blade. So a tassel or some kind of wrist strap through the ring pommel onto the wrist would be highly recommended, especially if you were going to try any thrusting with this, which I didn't do because I didn't have a wrist strap on there and I was not about to risk my hand. Now I should mention that the maroon gripped one is unsharpened for the first 2 inches or so of the blade, whereas the red gripped one is sharp all the way to the hilt. So despite that lightweight, these are balanced quite far out from the hilt. That looks like it's 9, 10 inches, something like that. So how do they handle? I'll be honest, not very well. You know, balanced that far out from the hilt on a sword that's designed to be used from horseback, this is not going to be a particularly pleasant sword to swing around a whole lot and use because it's really not designed for use on foot and doing a lot of cuts. I would imagine a lot of the point of this kind of sword would be you're on horseback and you're riding by and letting the horse's momentum do a lot of your cutting for you. You're mostly just trying to get extra reach with the length of the blade and let it kind of just run into people. Sure, you're going to do some movement with it, or maybe, you know, chop down like that, chop down like that, but you're not going to be doing a lot of movement and a lot of redirecting motion and things like that. This is not that type of sword. So it's really not a particularly fun sword to take into the backyard and cut bottles with, unless maybe you have a horse in your backyard and you can ride by and cut into bottles. That certainly isn't me. I don't think that's probably anybody who's watching this channel, but you never know. There are scabbards for both of these. The other one is starting to split a little bit on the back. You know, like I said, these swords have been shipped around quite a bit. And since these scabbards are made from pretty thin pieces of wood, shipping is not particularly good for that kind of material. It's unsurprising that they have started to take some damage from that because it's just, shipping's rough on swords and scabbards in particular. It's a very simple scabbard with a bronze collar and chape. It looks a bronze belt loop and some cord holding the belt loop in place. Overall, the fit is a little loose, but again, these have been shipped around a lot, so who knows how the fit would be when it was brand new. I don't think you can infer much from this. And even though it's a little bit loose, it's not like crazy loose or anything. It actually doesn't rattle almost at all. Maybe a little bit like that. but not a lot of rattle. And if you wanted this fit to be a little bit tighter, you could pretty easily shim it and it wouldn't be a problem at all. So despite these swords not being particularly pleasant to move around and swing around in the backyard, when I took them to do some cutting, they cut pretty dang well. I was able to get some good clean cuts on water bottles, plenty of others where I didn't. And overall, they move around well enough and they cut targets well enough that they can be fun in the backyard if you know what you're doing. You know, I really don't know what I'm doing with this type of dowel. I know no dowel techniques pretty much at all. And while they are a bit laborious to swing around for very long, they can still provide some pretty good cuts if you know what you're doing, if you can get your edge alignment on point. And with that, I've pretty much run out of things to say about these swords. Do I think they're worth the price? Kind of hard to say. For me, I wouldn't pay $350, $400 for these because they're just not in my wheelhouse. They're not the type of sword I'm going to want to take and cut with in the backyard. And that's one of the primary reasons I buy swords, is because I want to cut with them. And after I got done cutting with these, I was pretty much done cutting with them. I didn't have any urge to go back out there and cut anymore. If this is the kind of sword you're looking for, though, maybe you're trying to collect a wide variety of Chinese swords throughout history. Maybe you like this type of sword. Maybe you have a horse and you're going to cut targets with it. If that's what you're looking for, I think the craftsmanship here is good enough. I think the attention to historical accuracy seems good. The edge sharpness is good. Overall, I like the swords. I think they're very attractive, even with how simple they are. They're just not really for me. So overall, I think they're good enough for the price if it's what you're looking for. For me personally, no. But, you know, again, that's my personal taste. So I want to say once again, thank you to KK from LK Chen for sending me these swords to review. They are going to eventually move on to another person once I've finished videos on all the ones they sent me. Thank you, KK. I really appreciate it. Also, thank you to Dlatrex for giving me a more historical-oriented overview of this sword. For my viewers, if you haven't checked out his channel, I highly recommend you do it. Until next time, Alien Dude out.